The philosophical scripture, Leviathan, is brought to you by not a prophet.org, the place on the internet to find spiritual guidance powered by artificial intelligence. Of all passions, that which inclineth men least to break the laws is fear. Nay, excepting some generous natures, it is the only thing when there is appearance of profit or pleasure by breaking the laws that makes men keep them. And yet, in many cases, a crime may be committed through fear. For not every fear justifies the action it produceth, but the fear only of corporeal hurt, which we call bodily fear, and from which a man cannot see how to be delivered but by the action. A man is assaulted, fears present death, from which he sees not how to escape but by wounding him that assaulteth him. If he wound him to death, this is no crime, because no man is supposed, at the making of a commonwealth, to have abandoned the defense of his life or limbs, where the law cannot arrive time enough to his assistance. But to kill a man, because from his actions or his threatenings I may argue he will kill me when he can, seeing I have time and means to demand protection from the sovereign power, is a crime. Again, a man receives words of disgrace, or some little injuries, for which they that made the laws had assigned no punishment, nor thought it worthy of a man that hath the use of reason to take notice of, and is afraid unless he revenge it, he shall fall into contempt, and consequently be obnoxious to the like injuries from others, and to avoid this, breaks the law, and protects himself the future by the terror of his private revenge. This is a crime, for the hurt is not corporeal, but fantastical, and though, in this corner of the world, made sensible by a custom not many years since begun, amongst young and vain men so light, as a gallant man, and one that is assured of his own courage, cannot take notice of. Also a man may stand in fear of spirits, either through his own superstition, or through too much credit given to other men that tell him of strange dreams and visions, and thereby be made believe they will hurt him for doing or omitting diverse things which, nevertheless, to do or omit is contrary to the laws, and that which is so done or omitted is not to be excused by this fear, but is a crime. For, as I have shown before in the 2nd chapter, dreams be naturally but the fancies remaining in sleep, after the impressions our senses had formerly received waking, and when men are by any accident unassured they have slept, seem to be real visions, and therefore he that presumes to break the law upon his own or another's dream or pretended vision, or upon other fancy of the power of invisible spirits than is permitted by the Commonwealth, leaveth the law of nature, which is a certain offense, and followeth the imagery of his own or another private man's brain, which he can never know whether it signifieth anything or nothing, nor whether he that tells his dreams say true or lie, which if every private man should have leave to do as they must, by the law of nature, if any one have it, there could no law be made to hold, and so all commonwealth would be dissolved. From these different sources of crimes, it appears already that all crimes are not, as the Stoics of old time maintained, of the same alloy. There is place, not only for excuse, by which that which seemed a crime is proved to be none at all, but also for extenuation, by which the crime that seemed great is made less. For though all crimes do equally deserve the name of injustice, as all deviation from a straight line is equally crookedness, which the Stoics rightly observed, yet it does not follow that all crimes are equally unjust, no more than that all crooked lines are equally crooked, which the Stoics, not observing, held it as great a crime to kill a hen against the law as to kill one's father. That which totally excuseth a fact, and takes away from it the nature of a crime, can be none but that which, at the same time, taketh away the obligation of the law. For the fact committed once against the law, if he that committed it be obliged to the law, can be no other than a crime. The want of means to know the law totally excuseth. For the law whereof a man has no means to inform himself is not obligatory. But the want of diligence to inquire shall not be considered as a want of means, nor shall any man that pretendeth to reason enough for the government of his own affairs be supposed to want means to know the laws of nature, because they are known by the reason he pretends to. Only children and madmen are excused from offenses against the law natural. Where a man is captive, or in the power of the enemy, and he is then in the power of the enemy when his person, or his means of living, is so, if it be without his own fault, the obligation of law ceaseth, because he must obey the enemy or die, and consequently such obedience is no crime. For no man is obliged, when the protection of the law faileth, not to protect himself by the best means he can. If a man by the terror of present death be compelled to do a fact against the law, he is totally excused, because no law can oblige a man to abandon his own preservation. And supposing such a law were obligatory, yet a man would reason thus: if I do it not, I die presently; if I do it, I die afterwards. Therefore by doing it, there is time of life gained. Nature, therefore, compels him to the fact. When a man is destitute of food or other thing necessary for his life, and cannot preserve himself any other way but by some fact against the law, as if in a great famine he take the food by force, or stealth, which he cannot obtain for money nor charity, or in defense of his life, snatch away another man's sword, he is totally excused for the reason next before alleged. Again, facts done against the law by the authority of another are by that authority excused against the author, because no man ought to accuse his own fact in another that is but his instrument. But it is not excused against a third person thereby injured, because in the violation of the law both the author and actor are criminals. From hence it followeth that when that man or assembly that hath the sovereign power commandeth a man to do that which is contrary to a former law, the doing of it is totally excused, for he ought not to condemn it himself, because he is the author, and what cannot justly be condemned by the sovereign cannot justly be punished by any other. Besides, when the sovereign commandeth anything to be done against his own former law, the command, as to that particular fact, is an abrogation of the law. If that man or assembly that hath the sovereign power disclaim any right essential to the sovereignty, whereby there accrueth to the subject any liberty inconsistent with the sovereign power, that is to say, with the very being of a commonwealth, if the subject shall refuse to obey the command in anything contrary to the liberty granted, this is nevertheless a sin, and contrary to the duty of the subject, for he to take notice of what is inconsistent with the sovereignty, because it was erected by his own consent, and for his own defense, and that such liberty as is inconsistent with it was granted through ignorance of the evil consequence thereof. But if he not only disobey, but also resist a public minister in the execution of it, then it is a crime, because he might have been righted, without any breach of the peace, upon complaint. The degrees of crime are taken on diverse scales, and measured, first, by the malignity of the source, or cause; secondly, by the contagion of the example; thirdly, by the mischief of the effect; and fourthly, by the concurrence of times, places, and persons. The same fact done against the law, if it proceed from presumption of strength, riches, or friends to resist those that are to execute the law, is a greater crime than if it proceed from hope of not being discovered, or of escape by flight. For presumption of impunity by force is a root from whence springeth, at all times, and upon all temptations, a contempt of all laws, whereas in the latter case the apprehension of danger that makes a man fly renders him more obedient for the future. A crime which know to be so is greater than the same crime proceeding from a false persuasion that it is lawful. For he that committeth it against his own conscience presumeth on his force, or other power, which encourages him to commit the same again. But he that doth it by error, after the error shown him, is conformable to the law. He whose error proceeds from the authority of a teacher, or an interpreter of the law publicly authorized, is not so faulty as he whose error proceedeth from a peremptory pursuit of his own principles and reasoning. For what is taught by one that teacheth by public authority, the Commonwealth teacheth, and hath a resemblance of law, till the same authority controlleth it. And in all crimes that contain not in them a denial of the sovereign power, nor are against an evident law, excuseth totally, whereas he that groundeth his actions on his private judgment ought, according to the rectitude or error thereof, to stand or fall. The same fact, if it have been constantly punished in other men, is a greater crime than if there have been many precedent examples of impunity. For those examples are so many hopes of impunity, given by the sovereign himself, and because he which furnishes a man with such a hope and presumption of mercy, as encourageth him to offend, hath his part in the offense, he cannot reasonably charge the offender with the whole. A crime arising from a sudden passion is not so great as when the same ariseth from long meditation. For in the former case there is a place for extenuation in the common infirmity of human nature. But he that doth it with premeditation has used circumspection, and cast his eye on the law, on the punishment, and on the consequence thereof to human society, all which in committing the crime he hath contemned and postponed to his own appetite. But there is no suddenness of passion sufficient for a total excuse. For all the time between the first knowing of the law and the commission of the fact shall be taken for a time of deliberation, because he ought, by meditation of the law, to rectify the irregularity of his passions. Where the law is publicly, and with assiduity, before all the people read and interpreted, a fact done against it is a greater crime than where men are left without such instruction to inquire of it, with difficulty, uncertainty, and interruption of their callings, and be informed by private men. For in this case, part of the fault is discharged upon common infirmity, but in the former there is apparent negligence, which is not without some contempt of the sovereign power. Those facts which the law expressly condemneth, but the lawmaker by other manifest signs of his will tacitly approveth, are less crimes than the same facts condemned both by the law and lawmaker. For seeing the will of the lawmaker is a law, there appear in this case two contradictory laws, which would totally excuse, if men were bound to take notice of the sovereign's approbation, by other arguments than are expressed by his command. But because there are punishments consequent, not only to the transgression of his law, but also to the observing of it, he is in part a cause of the transgression, and therefore cannot reasonably impute the whole crime to the delinquent. For example, the law condemneth duels, the punishment is made capital. On the contrary part, he that refuseth duel is subject to contempt and scorn without remedy, and sometimes by the sovereign himself thought unworthy to have any charge or preferment in war. If thereupon he accept duel, considering all men lawfully endeavor to obtain the good opinion of them that have the sovereign power, he ought not in reason to be rigorously punished, seeing part of the fault may be discharged on the punisher, which I say, not as wishing liberty of private revenges, or any other kind of disobedience, but a care in governors not to countenance anything obliquely which directly they forbid. The examples of princes, to those that see them, are, and ever have been, more potent to govern their actions than the laws themselves. And though it be our duty to do, not what they do, but what they say, yet will that duty never be performed till it please God to give men an extraordinary and supernatural grace to follow that precept. Again, if we compare crimes by the mischief of their effects. First, the same fact when it redounds to the damage of many is greater than when it redounds to the hurt of few. And therefore when a fact hurteth, not only in the present, but also by example in the future, it is a greater crime than if it hurt only in the present. For the former is a fertile crime, and multiplies to the hurt of many, the latter is barren. To maintain doctrines contrary to the religion established in the Commonwealth is a greater fault in an authorized preacher than in a private person. So also is it to live profanely, incontinently, or do any irreligious act whatsoever. Likewise in a professor of the law, to maintain any point, or do any act, that tendeth to the weakening of the sovereign power, is a greater crime than in another man. Also in a man that hath such reputation for wisdom as that his counsels are followed, or his actions imitated by many, his fact against the law is a greater crime than the same fact in another. For such men not only commit crime, but teach it for law to all other men. And generally all crimes are the greater by the scandal they give, that is to say, by becoming stumbling blocks to the weak, that look not so much upon the way they go in, as upon the light that other men carry before them. Also facts of hostility against the present state of the Commonwealth are greater crimes than the same acts done to private men, for the damage extends itself to all. Such are the betraying of strengths or revealing of the secrets of the Commonwealth to an enemy, also all attempts upon the representative of the Commonwealth, be it a monarch or an assembly, and all endeavors by word or deed to diminish the authority of the same, either in the present time or in succession, which crimes the Latins understand by crimina lese majestatis, and consist in design or act contrary to fundamental law. Likewise those crimes which render judgments of no effect are greater crimes than injuries done to one or a few persons. As to receive money to give false judgment or testimony is a greater crime than otherwise to deceive a man of the like or a greater sum, because not only he has wrong that falls by such judgments, but all judgments are rendered useless, and occasion ministered to force and private revenges. Also robbery and depeculation of the public treasury or revenues is a greater crime than the robbing or defrauding of a private man, because to rob the public is to rob many at once. Also the counterfeit usurpation of public ministry, the counterfeiting of public seals or public coin, than counterfeiting of a private man's person or his seal, because the fraud thereof extendeth to the damage of many. Of facts against the law done to private men, the greater crime is that where the damage, in the common opinion of men, is most sensible. And therefore, to kill against the law is a greater crime than any other injury, life preserved, and to kill with torment, greater than simply to kill, and mutilation of a limb, greater than the spoiling a man of his goods, and the spoiling a man of his goods by terror of death or wounds, than by clandestine surreption, and by clandestine surreption than by consent fraudulently obtained, and the violation of chastity by force, greater than by flattery, and of a woman married than of a woman not married. For all these things are commonly so valued, though some men are more, and some less, sensible of the same offense. But the law regardeth not the particular, but the general inclination of mankind. And therefore the offense men take from contumely, in words or gesture, when they produce no other harm than the present grief of him that is reproached, hath been neglected in the laws of Greeks, Romans, and other both ancient and modern commonwealths, supposing the true cause of such grief to consist, not in the contumely, which takes no hold upon men conscious of their own virtue, but in the pusillanimity of him that is offended by it. Also a crime against a private man is much aggravated by the person, time, and place. For to kill one's parent is a greater crime than to kill another. For the parent ought to have the honor of a sovereign, though he have surrendered his power to the civil law, because he had it originally by nature. And to rob a poor man is a greater crime than to rob a rich man, because it is to the poor a more sensible damage. And a crime committed in the time or place appointed for devotion is greater than if committed at another time or place, for it proceeds from a greater contempt of the law. Many other cases of aggravation and extenuation might be added, but by these I have set down, it is obvious to every man to take the altitude of any other crime proposed. Lastly, because in almost all crimes there is an injury done, not only to some private men, but also to the Commonwealth, the same crime, when the accusation is in the name of the Commonwealth, it is called public crime, and when in the name of a private man, a private crime, and the pleas according thereupon called public, judicia publica, pleas of the crown, or private pleas. As in an accusation of murder, if the accuser be a private man, the plea is a private plea. If the accuser be the sovereign, the plea is a public plea. Chapter Roman 28 of Punishments and Rewards of Punishment is an evil inflicted by public authority on him that hath done or omitted that which is judged by the same authority to be a transgression of the law, to the end that the will of men may thereby the better be disposed to obedience. Before I infer anything from this definition, there is a question to be answered of much importance, which is, by what door the right or authority of punishing, in any case, came in. For by that which has been said before, no man is supposed bound by covenant not to resist violence, and consequently it cannot be intended that he gave any right to another to lay violent hands upon his person. In the making of a commonwealth, every man giveth away the right of defending another, but not of defending himself. Also he obligeth himself to assist him that hath the sovereignty in the punishing of another, but of himself not. But to covenant to assist the sovereign in doing hurt to another, unless he that so covenanteth have a right to do it himself, is not to give him a right to punish. It is manifest, therefore, that the right which the Commonwealth, that is, he or they that represent it, hath to punish is not grounded on any concession or gift of the subjects. But I have also shown formerly that before the institution of Commonwealth, every man had a right to everything, and to do whatsoever he thought necessary to his own preservation, subduing, hurting, or killing any man in order thereunto, and this is the foundation of that right of punishing which is exercised in every commonwealth. For the subjects did not give the sovereign that right, but only, in laying down theirs, strengthened him to use his own as he should think fit for the preservation of them all, so that it was not given but left to him, and to him only, and, excepting the limits set him by natural law, as entire as in the condition of mere nature, and of war of every one against his neighbor. From the definition of punishment, I infer, first, that neither private revenges nor injuries of private men can properly be styled punishment, because they proceed not from public authority. Secondly, that to be neglected and unpreferred by the public favor is not a punishment, because no new evil is thereby on any man inflicted. He is only left in the estate he was in before. Thirdly, that the evil inflicted by public authority, without precedent public condemnation, is not to be styled by the name of punishment, but of a hostile act, because the fact for which a man is punished ought first to be judged by public authority to be a transgression of the law. Fourthly, that the evil inflicted by usurped power and judges without authority from the sovereign is not punishment, but an act of hostility, because the acts of power usurped have not for author the person condemned, and therefore are not acts of public authority. Fifthly, that all evil which is inflicted without intention or possibility of disposing the delinquent, or, by his example, other men to obey the laws, is not punishment, but an act of hostility, because without such an end, no hurt done is contained under that name. Sixthly, whereas to certain actions there be annexed by nature diverse hurtful consequences, as when a man in assaulting another is himself slain or wounded, or when he falleth into sickness by the doing of some unlawful act, such hurt, though in respect of God, who is the author of nature, it may be said to be inflicted, and therefore a punishment divine, yet it is not contained in the name of punishment in respect of men, because it is not inflicted by the authority of man. Seventhly, if the harm inflicted be less than the benefit of contentment that naturally followeth the crime committed, that harm is not within the definition, and is rather the price or redemption than the punishment of a crime, because it is of the nature of punishment to have for end the disposing of men to obey the law, which end, if it be less than the benefit of the transgression, it attaineth not, but worketh a contrary effect. Eighthly, if a punishment be determined and prescribed in the law itself, and after the crime committed there be a greater punishment inflicted, the excess is not punishment, but an act of hostility. For seeing the aim of punishment is not a revenge, but terror, and the terror of a great punishment unknown is taken away by the declaration of a less, the unexpected addition is no part of punishment, but where there is no punishment at all determined by the law, there whatsoever is inflicted hath the nature of punishment. For he that goes about the violation of a law, wherein no penalty is determined, expecteth an indeterminate, that is to say, an arbitrary punishment. Ninthly, harm inflicted for a fact done before there was a law that forbade it is not punishment, but an act of hostility. For before the law there is no transgression of the law, but punishment supposeth a fact judged to have been a transgression of the law. Therefore harm inflicted before the law made is not punishment, but an act of hostility. Tenthly, hurt inflicted on the representative of the Commonwealth is not punishment, but an act of hostility, because it is of the nature of punishment to be inflicted by public authority, which is the authority only of the representative itself. Lastly, harm inflicted upon one that is a declared enemy falls not under the name of punishment, because seeing they were either never subject to the law, and therefore cannot transgress it, or having been subject to it, and professing to be no longer so, by consequence deny they can transgress it, all the harms that can be done them must be taken as acts of hostility. But in declared hostility, all infliction of evil is lawful. From whence it followeth that if a subject shall by fact or word wittingly and deliberately deny the authority of the representative of the Commonwealth, whatsoever penalty hath been formerly ordained for treason, he may lawfully be made to suffer whatsoever the representative will. For in denying subjection, he denies such punishment as by the law hath been ordained, and therefore suffers as an enemy of the Commonwealth, that is, according to the will of the representative. For the punishments set down in the law are to subjects, not to enemies, such as are they that, having been by their own act subjects, deliberately revolting, deny the sovereign power.